The crystal champagne flute shattered against the hardwood floor as I tumbled from the head table, my 64-year-old body crumpling like discarded gift wrap. Through tears of humiliation, I looked up to see my daughter-in-law Melissa standing over me, her wedding gown pristine white against the crimson rage of her face. "This is my day, Eleanor. My family now. You don't belong at this table or on this property." 200 guests fell silent, forks suspended midair, as my own son Robert avoided my eyes, but it was my 12-year-old grandson Tyler who rushed to help me up, whispering words that would change everything. "Don't worry, Grandma. Dad doesn't know yet, but I found Grandpa's will in the barn safe. The farm was never supposed to leave your name. I can still feel the ache in my hip when rain threatens, a permanent souvenir from that fall 7 months ago. The physical pain has dulled, but the memory remains sharp as the glass fragments the servers swept away while I sat in a bathroom stall, trying to compose myself. I keep asking myself how we got here, how the sweet-voiced dental hygienist who once brought me chicken soup when I had shingles could transform into someone who would physically push her husband's mother to the ground at her own wedding reception. Maybe you're wondering the same thing. Let me take you back to where it began, to help you understand why some family secrets are worth protecting and others demand to be exposed. Robert had been a widower for just over 3 years when he brought Melissa home to the family farm, the sprawling 180-acre property in western Pennsylvania that had been in my late husband Frank's family for 4 generations. Our son had been devastated when cancer took his first wife Sarah at just 38, leaving him to raise Tyler alone. I'd moved into the smaller guest house on the property after Frank passed the year before Sarah, giving Robert and Tyler the main farmhouse, but staying close enough to help with my grandson. The arrangement worked well for all of us, the legacy of the Miller family farm continuing just as Frank had wanted. I'll never forget the tenderness in Frank's voice the day he signed his final will, squeezing my hand as he said, "This land feeds more than bodies, Eleanor. It feeds souls. Promise me you'll protect it." I made that promise without understanding exactly what I was vowing to defend. Melissa came into our lives like summer rain on parched soiled Sudan, welcome, and seemingly heaven sent. I remember the first time Robert brought her to Sunday dinner, her laugh brightening our kitchen that had been too solemn for too long. Tyler, 9 then, watched her with cautious hope as she complimented my apple cobbler and asked thoughtful questions about his science project. "She makes Dad smile again," he told me later that night as I tucked him in, his small face serious in the glow of his bedside lamp. I kissed his forehead and whispered, "That's a precious gift." Sweethearts, I meant every word. After watching my son struggle through grief for 3 long years, I would have welcomed anyone who could restore joy to his life. What mother wouldn't? The courtship was swift and intense, too fast, perhaps, but who was I to judge the timeline of healing? Within 6 months, Melissa had moved into the farmhouse. I noticed small changes at first. My standing invitation to Sunday dinners became formal phone calls asking if I was planning to come over. The family photos in the living room, many featuring Sarah, were gradually relocated to less prominent positions than to closets. Tyler started appearing at my door more frequently, especially when Melissa's friends visited. "They talk about grown-up stuff and tell me to go play," he'd explain with a shrug that tried too hard to be casual. I'd welcome him in, pretending not to notice the relief in his eyes as he settled at my kitchen table with cookies and homework. I told myself all blended families need time to adjust, but I should have paid attention to the growing knot of worry in my stomach each time I crossed the 100 yards between our houses. Melissa's true colors emerged in layers, like winter frost gradually claiming a window pane. It began with casual comments during family gatherings. "Eleanor, isn't that sweater a bit young for you?" Or, "I've reorganized the kitchen completely, so you probably shouldn't try to cook here anymore." Small cruelties delivered with a smile, often when Robert wasn't within earshot. When I'd mention these moments to my son, concern would flicker across his face before being replaced with weary defensiveness. "Mom, she's just trying to establish herself here. It can't be easy coming into a ready-made family with so much history." The slight hesitation before history told me everything in Robert's mind. I was becoming exactly what I'd feared, the meddling mother-in-law, the obstacle to his new happiness. So I began swallowing my observations along with my pride, retreating more and more to my guest house as Melissa's territory expanded. The day Robert announced their engagement, exactly 11 months after they'd met. I forced my face into what I hoped was a convincing smile and hugged them both. Melissa's arms remained stiff around me, her expensive perfume momentarily suffocating. "We're going to make some changes around here," she whispered in my ear, too low for Robert to hear. "For the better." That night, I pulled out the manila envelope Frank had given me before he died, the one containing copies of property deeds, wills, and financial documents I'd never fully examined. My husband had always handled those matters, and in my grief, I'd simply trusted that our son would honor his father's wishes. I fell asleep at the kitchen table, papers scattered around me, my reading glasses perched on my nose, questions multiplying in my mind. I'll tell you exactly what I discovered in those documents later, but first, you need to understand how quickly things deteriorated once that diamond appeared on Melissa's finger. Wedding planning consumed the farm like kudzu overtaking a field, fast, aggressive, and transforming everything in its path. Melissa hired a prominent Pittsburgh wedding planner who spoke of vision and statement venues with religious reverence. I sat silently through meetings where they discussed converting our working barn, the same one where Frank had taught Robert to repair tractors, and where Tyler now kept his 4-H projects, into a rustic chic reception space requiring $23,000 in renovations. "We'll need to move the equipment and animals elsewhere for at least 2 weeks before," the planner explained, not meeting my eyes. "And of course, we'll need the entire property pristine for photos." I looked to Robert, waiting for him to explain that spring planting couldn't simply be postponed for aesthetic purposes, but he nodded along, one arm around Melissa's shoulders. Later, I overheard him on the phone with our longtime farm manager, authorizing overtime pay to accommodate the wedding schedule. "It's important to Melissa," he explained, as if that settled everything. Tyler started showing up at my door more frequently, his eyes cloudy with confusion. "Dad said I can't ride my bike on the main driveway anymore because they're keeping it perfect for wedding photos," he reported one April afternoon. "And I had to give up my bedroom for Melissa's dress. It needs its own room with special humidity or something." I poured him a glass of lemonade and asked casual questions about school while my mind raced. That night, I called my old friend Diane, who'd been our family attorney since before Robert was born. "Just a hypothetical question," I began carefully. "If property is held in trust for multiple generations, can one inheritor make substantial changes without consulting others named in the trust?" Her pause spoke volumes before she answered. "Eleanor, I think we need to have a real conversation about the Miller farm. Can you come to my office tomorrow? Bring any paperwork you have." I felt the first flutter of validation beneath my ribs. Maybe I wasn't just an overprotective mother or a clingy widow. Maybe something was genuinely wrong with the picture Melissa was painting over our lives. "I won't bore you with legal details, but I'll tell you what I learned in Diane's wood-paneled office the next day, April 15th. The farm had indeed been placed in a generational trust by Frank's grandfather, with strict provisions about its use and care. Frank had been the trustee during his lifetime, with the role passing to me upon his death, not directly to Robert as I'd assumed. The trust explicitly stated that the land must remain in agricultural use, with profits supporting the education of direct descendants and the maintenance of the property itself. Diane's face was grave as she explained. "According to these documents, Eleanor, you currently have legal authority over major decisions affecting the property, including renovations, land use, and who resides there." I felt the room tilt slightly. "But Robert's been running everything since Frank died. He's made all the decisions." Diane nodded sympathetically. "Has he consulted you on significant changes or expenditures?" When I shook my head, she sighed. "Then we have a situation. Have you signed any documents transferring authority?" The memory of the papers I'd sleepily endorsed after Frank's funeral flickered in my mind. Maybe. I don't remember exactly what I signed back then. I felt sick. Had I unknowingly signed away my responsibility to protect what Frank had entrusted to me? The weeks before the wedding became a silent war of territory and influence. I returned from Diane's office to find a construction crew measuring the guest house exterior, just getting dimensions for the caterer's tent. The foreman explained awkwardly. "They're planning to use this area for the seafood station." No one had consulted me. That evening, I called Robert and asked him to come by alone. When he arrived, his handsome face was already set in defensive lines. I kept my voice gentle as I showed him what I'd learned about the trust. "I'm not trying to interfere with your wedding, Robert. I just think we need to be careful about permanent changes to the property. His expression hardened. Mom, I've been running this farm for 5 years now. Dad would want us to use it to build new family memories, not preserve it like some museum. When I mentioned the trust's educational provisions for Tyler, Robert stood abruptly. So that's what this is about. You think Melissa and I won't take care of Tyler's future? His voice rose. You've never given her a chance. Not really. She was right about you all along. He left without another word, the screen door banging behind him like a gunshot. I stood alone in my kitchen, the trust documents trembling in my hands, wondering when exactly I'd become the villain in my own family's story. The next morning, I found Tyler sitting on my porch steps, hugging his knees to his chest. School had been out for an hour, but Robert hadn't called looking for him. They're fighting about money, he said without preamble. Dad said the wedding is costing more than they planned, and Melissa said they could just sell the north pasture to that developer who keeps calling. My blood ran cold. The north pasture held our best soil, the spring that supplied our water, and the maple grove where generations of millers had collected sap each February. It was the heart of the farm. When did they discuss this? I asked, keeping my voice casual as I invited him inside. Last night, after you and Dad talked. Melissa said you were causing trouble about the farm belonging to you, instead of Dad. Tyler's eyes, so like Frank's, watched me carefully. The farm's supposed to stay in the family forever, right? That's what Grandpa always told me. I squeezed his shoulder. Your grandfather wanted the farm to support this family for generations, especially you and your future cousins. I hesitated, then added, would you like to see something special? I led him to the small hope chest where I kept Frank's personal effects. From beneath carefully folded sweaters, I withdrew a leather-bound journal. Your grandfather kept a record of every important decision about this land. Maybe reading his words would help you understand what he wanted. For all of us. Tyler took the journal reverently. Can I borrow this? I nodded, not knowing that simple act would eventually save everything Frank had worked to protect. For the next month, I walked a tightrope, trying to support Robert's happiness while protecting our legacy from Melissa's more extravagant plans. I approved reasonable wedding expenses from the farm account but questioned the necessity of importing exotic flowers that cost more than our seasonal farmhands earned in a month. I agreed to the barn renovation but insisted on hiring local craftsmen who understood the structure's historical significance rather than the Instagram-famous designer Melissa preferred. Each compromise was met with increasingly cold responses from my future daughter-in-law. I didn't realize I needed to submit my wedding for budgetary approval, she said during one particularly tense planning session. Perhaps we should just move the entire event to a venue where we won't be nickel-and-dimed by family. Robert looked torn, his loyalty visibly stretched between us. I began to question whether standing my ground was worth the growing distance between me and my only child. I've wondered 1,000 times since if I should have simply stepped aside, let them drain the accounts and alter the property. Would that have preserved the relationship, even as it sacrificed the farm? If you were in my position, what would you have chosen? As the wedding approached, Melissa's control expanded beyond the ceremony itself to daily life on the farm. She replaced the generations-old Miller family dinner china with modern settings that matched her wedding color scheme. The antique furniture Frank had inherited from his grandparents was moved to storage, deemed too shabby for her vision of the farmhouse. I watched from my window as delivery trucks brought in sleek, uncomfortable-looking replacements. Tyler appeared at my door more frequently, often with homework questions that seemed designed to extend his visits. Dad's always in meetings for the wedding or the farm business now, he explained one evening in late May as I helped him with a science project. And Melissa says I should be more independent anyway. He paused, focusing intently on the model solar system we were constructing. Grandma, I found something weird in Grandpa's barn office yesterday. There's a safe behind his fishing photo, and it was open a little bit. I saw some papers with your name and Dad's name on them. My heart quickened. That's Grandpa's important documents safe. It should be locked. Tyler nodded. Melissa was coming out of there when I walked in. She said she was looking for more space to store wedding stuff, but she looked scared when she saw me. I kept my voice steady as I asked, "Did you see what the papers said?" He shook his head. She closed it real quick. But I remembered the combination from when Grandpa showed me once. It's your birthday. The conversation shifted to other topics. But that night, I lay awake wondering what Melissa had been searching for and whether she had found it. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and perfect, the kind of June day that makes even non-farmers thank God for good weather. I dressed carefully in the pale blue suit Robert and I had chosen together during a brief, harmonious shopping trip months earlier. As I fastened my late mother's pearl earrings, I made a decision. Today would be about celebration, not confrontation. Would set aside my concerns and focus solely on my son's happiness. The ceremony itself was undeniably beautiful, held beneath the ancient oak where Frank and I had once carved our initials as teenagers. Robert's voice broke as he recited his vows, and for a moment I glimpsed genuine love in Melissa's eyes as she looked at my son. I allowed hope to blossom perhaps. Once the wedding pressure subsided, we could find our footing as a family. The minister pronounced them husband and wife at exactly 17 p.m. I know because I checked my watch, thinking, this is the moment everything changes. I had no idea how prophetic that thought would prove to be, though not in the way I expected. The reception began smoothly enough. I was seated at the head table between Robert and Tyler, with Melissa on Robert's other side. The barn had been transformed beyond recognition. Crystal chandeliers hung from century-old beams, white roses cascaded from every surface, and the smell of expensive catering overwhelmed the familiar sense of hay and honest work. I made polite conversation with Melissa's parents, wealthy suburbanites who referred to our property as the country estate and asked repeatedly when Robert planned to develop the investment potential of the land. I smiled until my face hurt, ignoring the implications of their questions. The trouble began during the toasts. Melissa's father raised his glass and announced 2 new beginnings on this beautiful property and, to the bright future of Miller Farm Estates. A murmur ran through the local guests, many of whom had worked alongside our family for generations. Robert shifted uncomfortably beside me. Dad, Melissa hissed, we haven't announced that yet. Her father waved dismissively. Cat's out of the bag now. Besides, Eleanor must already know about the development plans, right? All eyes turned to me, and I felt heat rise in my cheeks as I realized I knew nothing about any Miller Farm Estates. I looked at Robert, waiting for him to explain that this was some misunderstanding, but his eyes were fixed on his plate. What development plans? I asked, my voice sounding strange even to my own ears. Melissa's smile tightened as she leaned across Robert. We were going to discuss this after the honeymoon. Eleanor, it's really not appropriate wedding conversation. Something in her tone, the condescension, the dismissal broke the dam of patience I'd built over months of compromise. As the legal trustee of this property, I said clearly, I think I should be informed about development plans bearing its name. The table fell silent. Robert's head snapped up. Mom, please, not now. I felt Tyler's small hand slip into mine beneath the table, squeezing in silent support. When, then? I asked quietly. After contracts are signed, after bulldozers arrive. Melissa stood abruptly, her wedding gown rustling. This is exactly why we didn't tell you. You've fought us on every decision, trying to control everything because you can't accept that this farm is Robert's now, that I'm his family now. What happened next seems both lightning fast and oddly slow in my memory. Melissa reached for my champagne flute, the special crystal that had been my mother's, and deliberately poured its contents onto the table in front of me. You need to leave, Eleanor. Go back to your little guest house and let us celebrate our day without your interference. I sat frozen as champagne dripped onto my suit. Robert finally found his voice. Melissa, that's enough. But his protest came too late and too weak. His bride turned to him, tears strategically welling in her eyes. I can't take this anymore. She's ruining everything. Then she turned back to me, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. I've seen the paperwork. I know what you did. Before I could ask what she meant, I felt her hands on my shoulders, a sharp push that sent me and my chair toppling backward. The fall happened in slow motions, of ceiling spinning above me, the horrified gasps of guests, the shattering of my glass as it hit the floor beside me. Pain shot through my hip as I landed awkwardly, my dignity in shards like the crystal around me. In the shocked silence that followed, Tyler was the first to move. My grandson knelt beside me, his rented suit getting dusty as he helped me sit up. Are you hurt, Grandma? He asked, his young voice steady despite the tears in his eyes. Robert finally rushed to my side, his face a mask of conflicted emotion. Mom, I'm so sorry. Are you okay? I couldn't answer. humiliation closing my throat. As two servers helped me to my feet, I heard Melissa already doing damage control, her voice carrying across the stunned reception. I'm so sorry, everyone. Eleanor has been under such stress lately, confused about so many things. We've been worried about her memory. The implication hung in the air like poison gas. I straightened my spine despite the pain and turned to face her. But Tyler spoke before I could. Stop lying. My grandson's voice rang out with surprising authority for a 12-year-old grandma isn't confused. You are. He turned to his father, pulling something from inside his suit jacket. Dad, I found this in Grandpa's safe. You need to read it right now. In his hand was a document I'd never seen before, with Frank's distinctive signature clearly visible at the bottom. The next few minutes unfolded in painful public theater. Robert read the document, his face draining of color. He looked up at Melissa, then at me, then back to the paper in his hands. Is this true? He asked his new wife, his voice barely audible. She snatched the paper, scanning it frantically. I couldn't see what it said, but I watched her expression cycle through shock, calculation, and finally desperate anger. This is obviously a fake, she declared, attempting to fold the document into her clutch. Tyler reached for it. It's not fake. That's Grandpa's real signature, the one with the little fishing hook at the end of the R that he showed me. Melissa held the paper away from him. This is an adult matter. Tyler, you need to stop interfering in things you don't understand. That's when my grandson said the words that would change everything. I understand that Grandpa never put the farm in Dad's name. The will says it belongs to Grandma until she decides to transfer it, and even then, it has to stay a working farm forever. You can't turn it into houses, and you can't sell it to your dad's developer friends. He turned to the shocked guests. That's why she pushed my grandma. She found out she can't sell our farm. The room erupted into chaotic murmurs. Local farmers who'd known our family for generations stood up, their faces dark with disapproval. Melissa's father grabbed the document from his daughter's hands, reading it with growing alarm. Robert just stared at me. Decades of misunderstanding crystallizing between us. Is this true? Mom, the farm was never transferred to me. The pain in his voice cut deeper than my injured hip. I nodded slowly. I never knew, Robert. The papers I signed after your father's funeral. I thought they gave you operational control, not ownership. The farm was always meant to stay in trust for the whole family, especially for Tyler and his future children. I reached for my son's hand. Your father wanted to protect this land from exactly what's happening now. He knew that someday, someone might value its worth in dollars more than its worth in legacy. Melissa's mother hurried to her daughter's side, shooting daggers at me with her eyes. This is ridiculous. You can contest this, Robert. She's clearly manipulating the situation. What happened next still fills me with pride whenever I remember it. Robert straightened his shoulders and looked directly at his new wife. Did you push my mother? The question hung in the air between them. Melissa's face crumpled into practiced tears. She was saying horrible things to me. You didn't hear what Robert cut her off. I asked you a simple question, Melissa. Did you push my 64-year-old mother to the ground at our wedding? When she didn't immediately answer, he turned away from her and knelt beside me. Mom, I am so sorry. For everything. For not listening. For not asking questions. For assuming. His voice broke. I squeezed his hand, finding my voice at last. We've both made mistakes, son. Over Robert's shoulder, I saw Melissa's face transform, the devastated bride mask falling away to reveal cold fury. She grabbed her father's arm, whispering urgently. I couldn't hear her words, but I recognized the calculating expression I'd glimpsed in unguarded moments over the past year. This battle was far from over. The rest of the reception dissolved into awkward clusters of guests, pretending not to notice the drama unfolding at the head table. Tyler stayed firmly by my side as Robert tried to salvage some semblance of normalcy, making strained conversation with well-wishers who offered congratulations with questioning eyes. Melissa huddled with her parents and a man I recognized as their attorney, their heads bent together in intense discussion. I whispered to Tyler, I think I should go back to the guest house and put some ice on my hip. My grandson shook his head firmly. If you leave, she wins, Grandma. Besides, I heard her tell her mom they're planning to change the locks on your house. Tonight, while everyone's distracted, my heart sank at this confirmation of Melissa's true character. How do you know all these things, Tyler? I asked, genuinely curious about this suddenly strategic child. He shrugged, suddenly looking his age again. Nobody notices kids much. We hear everything. I thought of all the adults who had underestimated this thoughtful boy, myself included, and silently vowed never to make that mistake again. The climax came as the reception was winding down. Melissa approached our table with her parents and their attorney flanking her like an honor guard. Her wedding makeup was immaculate again, her smile firmly fixed in place as cameras turned in her direction. "Eleanor, we need to discuss a few things privately," she began, her voice honey. "Perhaps we could step into the farmhouse." I recognized the trap immediately. Get me away from witnesses. Create another situation where it would be her word against mine. I smiled just as sweetly. "I think we should include Robert and Tyler in any family discussions, don't you? And perhaps Diane should join us." I gestured to my attorney friend, who had been watching the proceedings with professional interest from a nearby table. Melissa's facade flickered. "This is a private family matter." Robert moved to stand beside me. "Mom is family, Melissa, and Tyler too. Whatever you need to say can be said here." The standoff stretched until Melissa's father stepped forward, impatience breaking through his country club manners. "The contracts for Miller Farm Estates have already been signed. The earnest money has been paid. This development is merely a delay, not a roadblock." The revelation hung in the air like a thunderclap. Robert's face showed genuine shock. "What contracts? What Ernest's money?" Melissa's attorney cleared his throat. "Your signature is on the preliminary development agreement, Mr. Miller, dated March 15th of this year." Robert shook his head. "I never signed any development agreement." The lawyer produced a document from his briefcase, pointing to a signature at the bottom. Robert examined it, then looked up with dawning horror. "This isn't my signature. It's close, but—" He turned to Melissa, understanding breaking across his features like a storm. "Did you forge my signature on a real estate contract?" Her silence was answer enough. The lawyer quickly returned the document to his briefcase, suddenly less confident. "Perhaps we should continue this discussion after the festivities," he suggested, glancing around at the attentive audience. Diane stepped forward. "I think I should examine any contracts purporting to sell or develop Miller Farm property. Given my role as the trust's legal representative." She handed her card to Melissa's father. "I'll expect copies of all relevant documents by noon tomorrow. After that, we'll be filing a formal request for investigation into potential fraud." The wedding reception ended not with the traditional departure of the happy couple, but with a tense standoff between two legal teams hastily assembled in what had been our family's working barn just weeks earlier. Guests filtered out awkwardly, locals lingering to offer quiet support to Robert and me, while Melissa's friends departed in confused, gossiping cloisters. My hip throbbed painfully, but I refused to leave until I understood exactly what had been planned for our land. As Diane reviewed the documents Melissa's father reluctantly provided, the picture became clear. The Miller Farm Estates was to be an exclusive development of 35 luxury homes, with the original farmhouse converted to a clubhouse and the historic barn demolished to make way for a swimming pool and tennis courts. The agricultural fields land that had fed families through the Depression and to world wars would become putting greens and decorative ponds. The preliminary contract promised the developers access beginning just 2 weeks after the wedding, with construction to start by fall. All that history, all that legacy, erased for profit in a single season. The most devastating revelation came when Diane discovered the source of the down payment on the development deal. $175,000 withdrawn from the farm's operating account in 3 separate transactions, all bearing Robert's forged signature. Money that should have purchased seeds, repaired equipment, and paid our loyal workers had instead funded the first phase of our farm's destruction. Robert sat heavily in a reception chair as this news was delivered, his wedding suit rumpled, his new bride now huddled with her parents rather than at his side. "I didn't know," he kept saying, his voice hollow. "I trusted her to help with the bookkeeping after Sarah died. I signed blank checks sometimes when I was busy with the planting." Tyler leaned against his father's shoulder, no longer the wise beyond his years detective but simply a scared boy watching his family implode. I wanted to comfort them both, but the enormity of the betrayal left me speechless. How had we all been so blind? Night had fallen by the time the immediate crisis was contained. Diane had secured temporary injunctions preventing any development activity, and freezing the farm's accounts pending investigation. Melissa's parents had hastily departed with their legal team, claiming prior commitments but clearly retreating to regroup. The wedding guests were long gone, leaving servers silently dismantling the elaborate decorations in the now empty barn. Only the core of our family remained: Robert, Tyler, me, and the weight of all we had discovered. We sat at a clearing table, surrounded by half-empty champagne bottles and untouched wedding cake. "What happens now?" Tyler finally asked, his young voice steady despite the emotional chaos of the day. Robert looked at me, then at his son. "I don't know, buddy, but whatever happens, we'll face it together." He reached across the table and took my hand. All of us, in that moment, with strings of fairy lights still twinkling overhead. I felt Frank's presence so strongly I could almost smell his favorite aftershave. He had known something like this might happen one day. He had prepared for it. And somehow, he had reached beyond death, through the curiosity of a 12-year-old boy, to protect what he loved most. The days following the wedding, that wasn't brought painful clarity. Melissa did not return to the farmhouse that night or any night thereafter, choosing instead to stay with her parents in their gated community, 30 miles away. Legal letters replaced conversations as her father's attorneys demanded return of wedding gifts and expenses, while our team focused on recovering the misappropriated farm funds and voiding the fraudulent development contracts. Robert moved through these early days like a sleepwalker, alternating between stunned silence and bursts of frantic activity as he tried to understand how thoroughly he had been deceived. I found him one night at 3 a.m., sitting at Frank's desk in the barn office, surrounded by financial statements and property records. "I should have seen it," he said without looking up as I brought him a cup of tea. "She started asking about the farm's value the second month we were dating. She suggested selling the East Field to build a nest egg for our future before I'd even proposed." He rubbed his eyes, looking suddenly older than his 41 years. I was so desperate not to be alone anymore that I ignored every warning sign. Tyler proved surprisingly resilient through this turmoil. Perhaps because children often understand emotional truths more clearly than adults, clouded by hope or desire. "I never really liked her," he confided as we walked the property line one morning, checking fence posts that needed repair. "She always talked to me like I was a little kid, or not there at all. And she made Dad different, less laughing, more worried about saying the wrong thing." He picked up a fallen branch, testing its strength before adding it to the bundle of kindling in his arms. "Sarah, Mom never made him feel wrong. They just fit, you know." The simple wisdom in his observation brought tears to my eyes. "They did fit beautifully," I agreed. "And someday, when the time is right, your dad will find someone else who fits just as well." Tyler nodded sagely. "But we'll be more careful next time. I'll help you watch for the signs." I hugged this remarkable child, so like his grandfather in his quiet perceptiveness. "We'll all be wiser," I promised. Though I wondered if healing from betrayal ever truly makes us wiser, or just more frightened of being hurt again. Have you ever trusted someone completely, only to discover they were playing a role all along? How do you open your heart again after such deception? 3 weeks after the wedding disaster, I received an unexpected visitor at the guest house. Margaret Chen, the managing partner at Melissa's dental practice, arrived as I was deadheading roses in the garden. "I hope I'm not intruding," she began awkwardly. "I've been debating whether to come forward with this information." She held a manila envelope, her knuckles white against the pale paper. I invited her inside, curious but wary of anything connected to Melissa. Over coffee at my kitchen table, Margaret revealed why she had come. "Melissa has worked at our practice for 5 years. She's an excellent hygienist, very popular with patients, but there have been incidents." She carefully laid out a pattern that chilled me despite the warm June day. 3 previous relationships with wealthy older men, each ending abruptly after financial entanglements became complicated. The last one was particularly troubling, Margaret continued, sliding a newspaper clipping from her envelope. "Harold Jennings, a retired investment banker. Melissa was briefly engaged to him before coming to work for us. He died unexpectedly, and there were questions about changes to his will made shortly before his death." The article detailed a contested estate, with Harold's adult children challenging amendments that would have left significant assets to his devoted caregiver and companion, Melissa Winters, the woman who would later become my daughter-in-law, under the name Melissa Carlson. I stared at the photo accompanying the article, a younger Melissa, with differently styled hair, standing beside an elderly man at some charity function. The calculating smile was unmistakable. "Why are you showing me this now?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. Margaret sighed. "She's taken a leave of absence from the practice, claiming emotional distress over her failed marriage. She's already filed for significant alimony despite the brevity of the union, citing her contribution to farm operations and professional sacrifices." The dentist hesitated, then continued. "The partners are concerned about potential liability if she has a pattern of targeting vulnerable individuals for financial gain." She didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. We both understood the implications. "Does Robert know about her previous identity?" I asked. Margaret shook her head. "I don't think so. She's very careful about her past." As she gathered her things to leave, she hesitated at the door. "I should have spoken up sooner, when I first recognized her from the Jennings case. But she seemed genuinely happy with your son, and I thought perhaps she had changed." She met my eyes directly. "I'm sorry." I thanked her for her courage in coming forward now, when it still mattered. As her car disappeared down our driveway, I sat heavily on the porch steps, the envelope of evidence heavy in my lap, wondering how to share this final devastation with my already shattered son. In the end, it was Tyler who helped me find the right approach. When I explained the situation in age-appropriate terms, asking his advice about how to tell his father, my grandson thought carefully before answering. "Dad needs to know the whole truth, Grandma. Not knowing stuff is what got us here." He picked at a loose thread on his jeans. "But maybe don't tell him alone. Maybe we should have Mr. Peterson there too." Jim Peterson had been Frank's best friend since childhood and was now serving as Robert's sponsor in a support group for people dealing with betrayal trauma. His steady presence had been a lifeline for my son in recent weeks. "That's very wise," I told Tyler, marveling again at his emotional intelligence. "We'll invite Jim for dinner tomorrow, and we'll get through this together." Tyler nodded solemnly, like a real family should. Out of the mouths of babes comes the simplest and most profound truth. Real families face hard things together, not alone. The revelation about Melissa's true identity and pattern of behavior hit Robert hard, but it also provided a strange kind of closure. "It wasn't about me at all," he said quietly, after reviewing the evidence Margaret had provided. "I was just a target, a means to an end." Jim Peterson's steady hand on his shoulder seemed to anchor him as this truth settled in. The farm was the prize all along. I was just the pathway to get to it. The three of us, Jim, Robert, and I, sat on the farmhouse porch as twilight gathered, watching Tyler shoot baskets at the hoop Frank had installed years ago. "What do I tell him?" Robert asked, nodding toward his son. "How do I explain that I brought someone into our home who was essentially a predator?" Jim considered this carefully before responding. "You tell him that good people sometimes trust too easily because they judge others by their own honest hearts. You tell him that being deceived doesn't make you foolish, it makes the deceiver wrong." He squeezed Robert's shoulder. "And you tell him that even when trust is broken, we can build it again, more wisely but not more fearfully." I watched my son absorb these words, straightening slightly as if a burden had begun to lift. "Tyler already understands more than you think," I added gently. "He never stopped seeing you as his hero, even when you couldn't see it yourself." July brought the first court hearing regarding the farm. Dressed in my best suit, a supportive neighbor on each side, I sat across the aisle from Melissa and her parents as our respective attorneys presented arguments about the trust's validity and control. Melissa had cut and dyed her hair, presenting herself as a modest young woman in conservative clothing, a stark contrast to the glamorous bride who had dominated our lives. The transformation was jarring but unsurprising. She had always been a chameleon, adapting to whatever role served her purposes. The judge, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s, listened carefully as Diane explained the generations-old trust and the specific provisions Frank had added to protect the property from exactly this kind of development scheme. When Melissa's attorney argued that I was an elderly woman confused about complex financial matters, the judge's eyebrow rose sharply. "I'm 67 myself, counselor," she remarked dryly. "Shall I recuse myself due to advanced age and presumed confusion?" The courtroom rippled with suppressed laughter, and I felt the first glimmer of hope that justice might actually prevail. The case took an unexpected turn when the judge asked to hear from Tyler. The minor child has been raised on this property and is a beneficiary of the educational trust connected to the farm, she noted. I'd like to understand his perspective. Robert and I exchanged concerned glances we had deliberately tried to shield Tyler from the legal proceedings, but my grandson walked to the witness stand with calm determination. After being sworn in, he answered questions with the same clear-eyed honesty that had exposed the truth at the wedding. My grandpa showed me every inch of our farm before he died, he explained. He taught me which fields grow what crops, where the water comes from, how to fix the tractor when it breaks down. His voice grew more confident as he spoke. He made me promise to take care of the land someday, because it takes care of us. He said being a miller means being a guardian, not an owner. When Melissa's attorney tried to suggest Tyler had been coached, the boy fixed him with a steady gaze. My grandpa died when I was 8, sir. If someone coached me, it was him. The simplicity and sincerity of his testimony visibly moved everyone in the courtroom, except Melissa, whose face remained a mask of calculated sympathy that never reached her eyes. The judge's ruling came 3 days later. The Miller Farm Family Trust would remain intact, with me as the primary trustee and Robert as co-trustee, contingent upon his completion of financial management courses. All development contracts were declared null and void due to the fraudulent signatures. Most importantly, the court ordered an accounting of all farm funds, with Melissa required to repay the $175,000 she had diverted to the development scheme, plus legal costs. As a final protection, the judge placed a conservation easement on the property, ensuring it would remain agricultural land regardless of future ownership changes. The court finds compelling evidence that preservation of this working farm was the clear intent of Frederick Miller's trust provisions, she wrote in her decision. Furthermore, the attempted circumvention of these provisions through deception and forgery represents a breach of fiduciary duty of the most serious nature. When I read these words aloud to Robert on the farmhouse porch, he wept openly for the first time since the wedding. Dad would be proud, he whispered. Not of me, but of what you've done to honor his wishes. I took his hand. Your father would be proud of the man you're becoming now, Robert. It's not our mistakes that define us, but how we recover from them. August brought Melissa's counter-lawsuit, a sprawling complaint alleging emotional abuse, false imprisonment on the farm property, and defamation of character. The filing included dramatic claims that she had been lured into marriage under false pretenses and subjected to constant monitoring and control by an overbearing mother-in-law. Reading the allegations, I hardly recognized myself or our family. In her descriptions, the Miller farm was portrayed as a sinister backwater where Melissa had been isolated from friends and support systems. Robert's grief over Sarah was recast as emotional manipulation, designed to trap Melissa in a caretaker role. Even Tyler wasn't spared, described as a disturbed child encouraged to spy and report on his stepmother's activities. The lawsuit demanded $3.2 million in damages, calculated based on the potential profit Melissa claimed she would have realized from the farm development. She's actually admitting her plan in the lawsuit, Diane observed with grim satisfaction. This will backfire spectacularly. Still, the public airing of such vicious lies took its toll on all of us. Local gossip swirled, with some questioning whether there might be truth to Melissa's claims. I found myself explaining our family situation to people who had known us for decades, the humiliation of the wedding day replaying with each retelling. The turning point came unexpectedly through the kindness of strangers, or rather, through the community we had never fully appreciated until it rallied around us. Word of Melissa's lawsuit spread through farming circles, and suddenly our kitchen was filled with neighbors bearing casseroles and stories. She came by last spring asking about property values, reported Ed Michaels, whose dairy farm adjoined our northern boundary. Said she was doing market research for dental clients interested in country properties. Joanne from the local bank revealed that Melissa had inquired about the farm's mortgage status and outstanding loans just weeks after meeting Robert. Something felt off, but client confidentiality prevented me from saying anything directly, she admitted regretfully. The county assessor's office confirmed that someone matching Melissa's description had requested copies of our property surveys in February. Piece by piece, a picture emerged of a calculated campaign to gather information about the farm's assets long before the wedding was even planned. As these revelations accumulated, Robert's self-blame began to transform into righteous anger. She didn't just fool me, he realized. She was working an entire community. Somehow, this understanding that even experienced, cautious professionals had been taken in by Melissa's performance helped ease the burden of his supposed failure to see through her deception. September arrived with a chill in the morning air and new beginnings. For our healing family, Robert enrolled in both financial management courses and trauma therapy sessions. Tyler started 7th grade with a research project on agricultural trusts that made his teachers raise their eyebrows but earned him top marks. I found myself unexpectedly enjoying a more active role in farm operations. My business degree finally put to use in updating systems Frank had managed with pencil and paper. Each evening, the three of us gathered around the farmhouse table, antique one Robert had retrieved from storage, replacing Melissa's modern glass monstrosity, and shared the day's challenges and small victories. We were finding our rhythm again, rediscovering the easy companionship that had characterized our family before Melissa's arrival. I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop, Robert confessed one night as we sat on the porch, watching fireflies rise from the fields. For the next legal attack or some new revelation. I understood his hypervigilance, the constant bracing for the next blow that comes after betrayal. That's natural, I assured him. But at some point, we have to choose to stop looking over our shoulders and start looking ahead again. He nodded, though I could see he wasn't quite ready for that step. Healing has its own timeline, one that can't be rushed no matter how much we wish to fast forward through the pain. The final confrontation came on a rainy Tuesday in late September, almost exactly 4 months. After the disastrous wedding, I was alone in the guest house, reviewing farm account statements at my kitchen table, when a knock at the door revealed Melissa standing on my porch. Gone was any pretense of the modest, wronged wife from the courtroom. She wore designer clothes and heavy makeup. Her hair returned to the honey blonde shade she'd favored during her time with Robert. "We need to talk," she announced, stepping past me without invitation. I considered calling for help but decided against it. Robot was in Pittsburgh at therapy, and Tyler at school. Whatever Melissa wanted, perhaps it was better to hear it directly. "I'm listening," I said, leaving the door open despite the rain. She surveyed my simple home with barely concealed disdain, then got straight to the point. "My father is dying," she stated flatly. "Pancreatic cancer. He has 3 months at most." I expressed genuine sympathy. No one deserves such a diagnosis, but remained wary of where this was heading. "He wants to resolve this situation before he goes," she continued. "He's prepared to drop all litigation and pay back the farm account money in exchange for a small parcel of land, just 5 acres on the road frontage, enough to build one house." When I didn't immediately respond, her composure cracked slightly. "It's his dying wish to see me settled somewhere permanent." I studied the woman who had nearly destroyed our family, trying to see past my own anger to the truth of the moment. "Why would you want to live here, Melissa? Next door to people you've sued and accused of horrible things?" She waved dismissively. "I wouldn't live here. We'd flip the property once the legal restrictions expire. The location alone is worth a fortune with proper marketing." The breathtaking callousness of this admission coming immediately after invoking her father's deathbed, which has confirmed everything we had learned about her character. I kept my voice level as I responded. "The trust provisions preventing development don't expire, Melissa. That's the entire point of a generational trust. Even if I wanted to, which I don't, I couldn't legally sell you that land for residential development." Her face hardened. "Don't play innocent, Eleanor. Everyone has their price. Name yours." I thought of Frank, of his absolute conviction that this land should feed families for generations, not be carved into status symbols for the wealthy. I thought of Tyler and the heritage that was his birthright. "Some things truly aren't for sale," I told her. "Not at any price." She laughed bitterly. "Now I see where Robert gets his pathetic sentimentality. You're both living in the past, clinging to dirt and old buildings while the world moves on." As she turned to leave, she delivered a final barb. "You've won this round, old woman, but I'll outlive you. And when you're gone, Robert will sell. He's weak that way. Always has been." After she left, I sat for a long time watching rain stream down my windows, her words echoing in my mind. Not the threats, those didn't worry me. Our legal protections were now ironclad, but her assessment of Robert as weak, was that how she had always seen him? Had she mistaken his kindness his emotional openness following devastating loss, as weakness to be exploited rather than strength to be admired. The thought broke my heart all over again, not for myself, but for my son who had offered genuine love and received calculated manipulation in return. When Robert returned that evening, I debated whether to tell him about Melissa's visit. In the end, honesty prevailed. We had promised no more secrets in our family, no matter how painful the truth might be. He listened quietly as I recounted the conversation, his expression unreadable. When I finished, he was silent for so long I worried I had made the wrong choice. Finally, he spoke. "Thank you for telling me." He looked out toward the fields where twilight was gathering. "You know what's strange? 6 months ago, I might have considered her offer not because I wanted money, but because I so desperately wanted peace with her." He shook his head slowly. "I couldn't see that some people don't want peace. They want victory, at any cost." October brought the first frost, and with it, closure. Melissa's father indeed passed away, though whether from cancer as claimed or some other cause, we never learned. What we did discover, through legal channels, was that all lawsuits against our family were dropped 3 days after his funeral. The funds misappropriated from the farm account were repaid in full, via a bank wire with no accompanying message. Melissa herself seemed to vanish, her social media accounts deleted, her position at the dental practice filled by a new hygienist. Margaret Chen called to inform us that Melissa had relocated to Arizona, apparently having found a new position and, perhaps a new target at an upscale practice catering to wealthy retirees. "I thought you should know," she said, "for your peace of mind." And strangely, it did bring peace, knowing that the woman who had brought such chaos into our lives was now hundreds of miles away, her attention turned elsewhere. The threat had passed, like a storm that leaves destruction in its wake but eventually moves on, allowing the slow work of rebuilding to begin. We marked the 1-year anniversary of Frank's death quietly, just the three of us visiting his favorite fishing spot at dawn. Tyler brought the journal I had given him months earlier, now filled with his own observations about the farm alongside his grandfather's wisdom. "I think Grandpa knew something like this might happen someday," he said as we watched mist rise from the pond. "That's why he left all those letters and documents in different places, like a backup system." Robert nodded, his arm around his son's shoulders. "Dad always said, farming teaches you to prepare for disasters, weather, pests, market crashes." I guess he applied that thinking to family protection too. I thought about Frank's foresight, his careful planning that had reached beyond death to shield what he loved. Some might call it paranoia, but I recognized it now as a profound expression of love, not just for land or legacy, but for the people who would continue without him. He had trusted that someday, when it mattered most, we would find our way back to what was truly important. And against all odds, winter settled over the farm, bringing the quiet reflection that has always characterized this season in agricultural communities. The fields lay dormant under blankets of snow, gathering strength for spring's renewal. In the farmhouse kitchen, restored now to its warm functionality after Melissa's brief reign of sterile modernity, Robert and I sat reviewing plans for the coming year. "I've been thinking," he said, spreading maps of the property across the table. "The northeast section, by the old apple orchard, what if we converted that to an educational space, partner with the local schools for agriculture and environmental programs?" The idea sparked immediately, connecting with something I'd been considering but hadn't voiced. "Your father always said the farm should feed more than bothies," I reminded him. "A place where children could learn about sustainable farming, where the community could gather." Robert's eyes lit with genuine enthusiasm for the first time in months. "Tyler's already drawing up plans for what he calls a learning barn. I think Dad would have loved it." We worked late into the evening, sketching possibilities, our collaborative vision healing the final fractures between us. As snow fell gently outside, I felt Frank's presence stronger than ever, not as a ghost or memory, but as the foundation upon which we were building something new and hopeful. Spring will arrive soon on Miller Farm, bringing with it the familiar cycle of planting and growth. The land remains as it has for generations, working fields, feeding communities, providing livelihoods, connecting people to the earth and to each other. The farmhouse stands renewed, cleared of the artificial glamour Melissa briefly imposed but honored in its authentic history. The barn nearly sacrificed to a developer's swimming pool. Vision continues, It's essential work, sheltering equipment and animals, while plans progress for its educational extension. Robert has begun cautious friendships with several women from his support group, moving slowly but purposefully toward the possibility of genuine partnership. Tyler grows tall and thoughtful, balancing schoolwork with increasing responsibility on the farm, his grandfather's journal rarely far from reach, and I find myself unexpectedly content in my role as family matriarch and co-trustee. My business skills and institutional memory valued rather than dismissed as the meddling of a confused old woman. I still feel the occasional twinge in my hip on rainy days, a physical reminder of how quickly trust can be broken and how painfully consequences can manifest. But that pain also reminds me of what we saved through our collective vigilance, a legacy worth far more than the millions Melissa and her co-conspirators had hoped to extract from our land. If I could speak to her now, I might actually thank her. Her betrayal forced us to articulate what this farm truly means to our family, to formalize protections that might otherwise have remained assumptions, to recognize the strength in each other that might have gone uncelebrated in less challenging times. Sometimes it takes nearly losing something precious to fully understand its value. If you're facing a similar crossroads, questioning whether to stand firm for a principle when compromise seems easier, wondering if protecting a legacy is worth the personal cost, I hope our story offers some guidance. The path of resistance is never easy, but some things truly are worth fighting for. I'm recording this from the guest house porch, watching spring's first tentative green emerge in the fields Frank and I once walked as teenagers. Tyler is helping Robert repair fencing by the north pasture, their laughter carrying across the distance. In an hour, we'll gather for Sunday dinner in the farmhouse kitchen, a tradition Melissa briefly interrupted but never truly ended. The farm continues, as Frank intended, feeding bodies and souls for yet another generation. If you've stayed with me through this long story, I thank you. If something in our experience resonates with your own journey, save this to remember that even the most carefully orchestrated deceptions eventually collide with truth. And if you know someone facing their own battle for something precious, share this as a reminder that standing your ground isn't stubbornness. Sometimes it's the purest form of love. Leave a comment letting me know what you would have done in my place. Would you have confronted Melissa sooner? Handled things differently with Robert? I'm still learning, even at 65, and your wisdom matters to me. Until next time, this is Eleanor Miller, signing off from the farm that feeds more than buffers, it feeds souls.